Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another episode of my Film of the Year. Yes, I found another of my favourite films that I've watched this year for the first time. We're going to go back to 1974. What a great year of cinema that was. And The Night Porter, reuniting Dirk Bogarde and Charlotte Rampling, who worked together in Visconti's The Damned, which I did a video about featuring Ingrid Thulin. This is directed by Liliana Cavani, a filmmaker that I'm not familiar with. This is the first film of hers that I've seen. I might have to check out more. This of course was really controversial when it came out. It was banned in several places. Certain critics really did not like it, including Pauline Kael, which means it's probably a good film. This is the cult film label, which does a lot of art house films from Europe. This has a really nice restoration. It's a 4K restoration supervised by Liliana Cavani, and also with the support of Charlotte Rampling, and it has a wonderful audio interview with Liliana Cavani over scenes of the film, which really give you a good idea of the making of the film. And there's just an excellent interview with Charlotte Rampling as well, who has always had this kind of otherworldly aura about her and presence. It's wonderful that in the interview she says that she never made films to entertain. That's why she kind of picked and chose her own films. Obviously, maybe in later life that's not quite as true as it was when she was starting out in the chunk of her career. But that's a wonderful interview as well. The film itself has a kind of Visconti, The Damned feel about it. It's also got Joseph Losey's Mr. Klein, Alain Delon, just that kind of feel. It's got the palette of Mr. Klein and Jean-Pierre Melville films. You can kind of see perhaps an influence on Michael Haneke. There's maybe even a faint touch of an influence on Cronenberg as well. Now obviously people got upset about the film because it's about two people who met during World War II in slightly different positions, and then they meet again years later in Vienna. Excuse me. Dirk Bogarde was a Nazi, and Charlotte Rampling was a prisoner who went through a lot of trauma perpetrated by Dirk Bogarde, but it ends up being a rather perverse love story. Now, before everybody says, oh, this is terrible, remember the majority opinion is, as far as love is concerned, that, oh, there's somebody out there for everybody. So maybe Charlotte Rampling's character and Dirk Bogarde's character, you know, were always meant to be in love, even though one of them was a Nazi and one of them was one of the Nazis' victims. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, oh, this is disgusting, trading on the atrocities that the Nazis did, and also say, oh, there's somebody for everybody and all of that nonsense. So we're introduced to Dirk Bogarde, who is the night porter. It's not actually an autobiography of Mark Lanegan, and he's working in a hotel in Vienna. He's looking after an old countess that's probably an old Nazi countess, and he has strange ex-Nazi friends who still want to be Nazis, but they are going around trying to clear their name by making sure there's no witnesses to their crimes left that could possibly testify against them. And just by happenstance, Charlotte Rampling's character comes in with her husband, who's a orchestra conductor, and the look that she gives when she sees Dirk Bogarde is just one of the great glances in cinema history. And we see kind of in flashbacks what she went through, which is obviously unpleasant. It's wonderful seeing an 18 rated film that's actually an 18 rated film. In the hotel, which you could argue in some ways is sort of a camp, lots of different personalities, lots of different people coming. Obviously, unlike a camp, they can go as well. There's a young man who obviously has a thing for the night porter, who is a dancer, and Dirk Bogarde goes up to his room sometimes and shines a light on him, and he performs a dance. We also see a flashback of his dance routine for Bogarde and other Nazis during the war. Again, the film is one of those, I would say, horrible, beautiful films. The production design is absolutely beautiful, the costumes, again, the look of the film, that kind of Melville, melancholy blue. But again, there's signs of decay. A lot of the flashbacks to the facility where Rampling was a prisoner, there's rust and decaying tiles and decaying rooms. There is that sense of decay, strangely enough. But it has this mix of the high art of, Charlotte Rampling's husband is an orchestra conductor, so you've got classical music, you've got ballet from this male dancer, but it's also, you've got the mix of the human depravity, and as Rampling gets more and more flashbacks of the horror, the true kind of nature of her relationship with Dirk Bogarde's character kind of comes to fruition for the audience before our eyes. And again, that's one of the questionable things about the film that upset people, is this idea that through trauma there can be some sort of sexual thrill, sadomasochism. There's scenes where one of the characters, or both of the characters, accidentally cut themselves and there's blood, and then that just seems to be like a literal red flag to Bull. So obviously, as in Cronenberg's Crash, people don't like to see or think about the idea of people being turned on by cruelty or turned on by violence. But again, if you believe that, you know, there's somebody there for everybody, blah blah blah, and love's wonderful, then as I said, why would you question that Dirk Bogarde's character and Charlotte Rampling's character fall in some kind of dark and twisted love? Just because their love isn't your idea of love, then that doesn't make it any less strong. But obviously there's forces at work that doom this perverse love, and you know, if you watch the channel long enough, then that's the kind of love that I'm into. Doomed, tragic, perverse, with no real hope to it. Obviously Bogarde's friends kind of realise that Rampling is a witness to their deeds during the war, so obviously they want to probably get rid of her, and obviously Rampling's husband would quite like to find her, so the police are after them as well. The film's 118 minutes. It just flies by, because again you're just hooked into these characters. You know, during Charlotte Rampling's interview, she talks about how you know, Dirk Bogarde was just an actor that you couldn't help but look at, and he said that Rampling had that quality as well, that quality of magnetism, and it's just so true. Their performances are absolutely brilliant. They talk about how Cavani didn't really speak English that well. Their Italian was far from stellar, and like Rampling said, she didn't speak it at all. So they kind of took their own kind of idea of the scenes to give it much more emotionality, which isn't actually a word, but much more emotionality than perhaps the first script. I mean, Bogarde had this compulsion to make this film, and he kind of felt that Rampling was the only female actor that could do it. Originally there was talk maybe Mia Farrow, but they saw Rampling and that was it. She didn't even need a screen test. And again, because they'd worked together in The Damned, they kind of formed a long-term friendship, and they're just fantastic. You know, there's tough scenes in the film, physical, violent scenes, which again, I think obviously people who don't like the film focus on the Nazi aspect and the camp aspect. But again, Cavani kind of started in documentaries, and she kind of was fascinated by female survivors of the concentration camps, and she talked to a woman that had survived Dachau and a woman that had survived Auschwitz, and just their stories of the things they had to do to survive. I mean, obviously films have talked about stuff like The Pianist, and you know, even in Shoah there's a little boy who sung for the Nazis, and that was kind of the thing that helped him survive. You know, one of the women talked about how her family just wanted her to forget about it, and why can't you just forget about it? Obviously when you go through just unspeakable things, it's hard to just like switch it off. And in no way does The Night Porter glamorise the Nazis or anything. It doesn't. I don't really think it's an exploitative film. I think 51 years later, it's just a wonderful piece of art, I think. And again, with those two actors, it just elevates it completely. I mean, there is a wonderful moment where Bogarde and his ex Nazi pals are talking about their situation, and Dirk Bogarde does the Heil Hitler, and of course they all do the Heil Hitler, and Bogarde just turns around to walk away, and you can see there's a little wry smile on his face because he is actually taking the piss out of them, but of course they don't know that. I've read some like 1-star reviews of the film, which are always entertaining to see the opposite view. And of course people were complaining because it doesn't condemn the Nazis. I mean, even though I think it doesn't glamorise them either, so I don't think we really need to come out and have a big statement about condemning the Nazis. Again, it's that Cronenberg thing again with Crash. Audiences want to be told, oh, these people are bad, but of course proper artists don't do that. They just show the people. They don't say, oh, these people are bad, these people are good. That's what good artists do. And there is, one of the reasons Bogarde's character works as a night porter, because he says himself that he has a sense of shame when he's in the light, when he's in the daylight. So he is, to some extent, a lot more ashamed of his past than his previous colleagues or friends are. They're still very adamant in the Nazi belief, and just because they lost the war, that doesn't stop them being Nazis. Obviously they have to go into hiding, etc, etc, and that's why they want to get rid of any witness that can actually provide testimony against them and what they did. So it's just it is an absolutely brilliant film, and it has now become my film of the year. And again, this release by Cult Films is absolutely beautiful, and the 2 interviews are fairly lengthy, and they give you a good background on the making of the film, on Dirk Bogarde, because again, really, Dirk Bogarde, he was like 53 at this time, even though you always imagine him being a bit older. And when you think about Dirk Bogarde, he is one of those actors that has certainly went up in my estimation since I started doing the YouTube channel, and making films like this, and The Damned, and The Servant, and Death in Venice. A lot of actors, once they get to a certain point, just kind of go into autopilot, especially kind of American actors. They tend to stick to their shtick, and that's them for the rest of their career. Nothing against them, but obviously like Richard Widmark and Henry Fonda and Glenn Ford, and once they got to a certain point, they would just go into that kind of autopilot for the rest of their career. Bogarde was always doing dodgy films, if you like, and always kind of pushing himself into kind of darker, more interesting material. So I certainly take my hat off to him, and I do have a lot more respect for Bogarde than I did when I started this channel back in 2018, I think. Yes, I've been whittling on for about 8 years now, 7 years. Yeah, but The Night Porter, my new film of the year, perhaps not for everybody obviously, but it appeals to my sensibilities as far as romance and all that guff. So thanks so much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen The Night Porter, and which side of the argument you're on, whether it's absolutely fantastic or whether it's a load of rubbish. And hopefully you'll join me again, and who knows, I might have more films of the year as we approach the end of April. So thanks so much for watching. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.